He was 18 years old, with nothing to his name but a state-issued duffel bag and a future as blank as a whitewashed wall. What he was about to inherit wasn't just a piece of land. It was a history of sacrifice he never knew, a choice that would define him, and a second chance he never thought he deserved. If you've ever felt like you were starting from zero, like the whole world had written you off before you even got a chance to write your own story, then hit that subscribe button, because this is our story. The air in the group home always smelled the same. A flat, sterile combination of industrial cleaner, microwaved spaghetti, and the faint underlying scent of resignation. For 6 years, it had been the smell of my life. On the morning of my 18th birthday, it smelled like freedom, which was a lot like smelling nothing at all. I stood in the doorway of the room I'd shared with 3 other boys, my worn duffel bag slung over my shoulder. It contained 2 pairs of jeans, a few t-shirts, a toothbrush, and the dog-eared copy of a book a long-forgotten foster mother had given me. Everything I owned in the world. Miss Albright, my caseworker for the last 2 years, stood in the hallway, her expression a careful mixture of professional sympathy and bureaucratic weariness. She was a good person, I think, but she was tired. The system makes everyone tired. She held a large manila envelope, the final paperwork of my childhood. "Leo," she said, her voice soft but firm, the way you speak to a spooked animal. "This is it. You're officially an adult." She handed me the envelope. It felt impossibly light, as if 18 years of state-managed existence could be summed up in a dozen pages of forms and signatures. Inside was my birth certificate, my Social Security card, and a check for $124, the leftover balance from my state allowance, my severance package from the system. "There's a bus ticket in there, too. It'll get you to the city. From there, it's up to you." I nodded, the words getting stuck somewhere in my throat. I'd imagined this moment 1,000 times. I thought I'd feel a surge of triumph, of release. Instead, I just felt hollow, like a bell that had been rung so many times it had forgotten how to make a sound. The other boys in the home were already moving on, their lives a constant current of arrivals and departures. I was just another departure. "Thank you, Miss Albright," I managed to say. The words felt like they belonged to someone else. She offered a small, sad smile. "There's one more thing, Leo. This came for you, from a law office." She pulled a second, smaller envelope from her briefcase. It was thick, creamy white paper, the kind I'd only ever seen in movies. My name, Leo Vance, was typed neatly on the front, along with the address of the group home. In the top left corner, the return address was for an attorney at law in a town I'd never heard of, Chapel Creek, Tennessee. My heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Tennessee. That's where she was from. My mother. The woman who was just a faded photograph in a file full of redacted reports. The official story was simple. She'd given me up when I was a baby and had died in a car accident a few years later. No family, no one. That was the mantra of my life. "A lawyer?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I took the envelope. The paper felt heavy, important. "What for?" Miss Albright shook her head, her expression unreadable. "I don't know. They sent it to be delivered to you on your 18th birthday. Specifically today. It's a legal matter, so I can't open it. It's addressed to you, as an adult." She looked at her watch, a signal that our time was up. The system had allocated 15 minutes for my emancipation, and we were on minute 14. "Good luck, Leo. I mean that. Be smart. Be safe." She gave my shoulder a brief, awkward squeeze, and then she turned and walked down the hallway, her sensible shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The sound echoed until it was gone, and then there was only silence. I was alone. Truly, finally alone. I stood there for another minute, the two envelopes clutched in my hand. One was my past, a flimsy collection of state documents. The other felt like a door to a room I never knew existed. I walked out of the front door of the group home and didn't look back. The sun was bright, the air was cold, and for the first time in my life, I had absolutely no idea where I was going. The bus station was a chaotic symphony of hurried announcements, crying children, and the weary sighs of travelers. I found a hard plastic chair in a forgotten corner and sat down, the duffel bag at my feet. My bus to the city didn't leave for another hour. My hands were trembling slightly as I stared at the lawyer's envelope. Part of me wanted to tear it open right there, to know what secret it held. Another, more cautious part, the part that had learned to survive by expecting nothing, wanted to throw it away. Hope was a dangerous thing. It was the currency of disappointment. For years, I had trained myself not to feel it. But the weight of the paper in my hands was undeniable. It was real. I took a deep breath and carefully slid my finger under the flap, breaking the seal. Inside was a single folded sheet of thick watermarked paper. It was a letter, formal and concise. It was from a man named Silas Abernathy, an attorney in Chapel Creek. The letter stated that upon her death 12 years ago, my mother, Sarah Vance, had left her entire estate in a trust for me, to be transferred upon my 18th birthday. The estate, it said, consisted of a single property, a 30-acre farm, complete with a farmhouse, a barn, and several outbuildings. My eyes scanned the words again, and then a third time. 30 acres? A farm. It didn't make any sense. My mother, according to my file, had nothing. She was a transient, unstable. The words used to describe her were clinical and cruel. How could a woman like that own a farm? The letter went on to say that the property taxes had been paid automatically from a small fund she had also set aside, a fund that was now nearly depleted. If I wished to claim my inheritance, I needed to travel to his office in Chapel Creek to sign the paperwork and take possession of the deed and the keys. He had enclosed a prepaid bus ticket. Not to the city, like the one Miss Albright had given me, but a cross-country ticket. From Ohio all the way down to a pinprick of a town in the middle of Tennessee. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This couldn't be real. It was a mistake. A cruel joke. People like me didn't inherit things. We were the ones left behind, the loose threads in the fabric of society. We didn't own land. We barely owned ourselves. I looked at the 2 bus tickets in my hand. One led to a homeless shelter in a city where I knew no one. It led to a life I had been preparing for, a life of scraping by, of staying invisible, of surviving. The other ticket led to a ghost. It led to a lie or a miracle, I couldn't tell which. It led to a place that might not even exist, to a story that contradicted everything I had ever been told about myself, about my mother. For my entire life, other people had made decisions for me. Where I would sleep, what I would eat, who I would be. My file was my identity, Leo Vance, orphan, ward of the state. But holding that letter, that ticket to Tennessee, I felt the first flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time. A choice. It was my choice. The bus to the city was boarding at Gate 3. The bus to Tennessee was leaving in 20 minutes from Gate 7. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I walked past Gate 3, past the line of people shuffling toward a predictable future. I walked toward Gate 7, toward the impossible. I didn't know if I was walking toward a home or a heartache, but for the first time, I was the one doing the walking. The bus ride was a 20-hour journey through the heart of a country I had only ever seen through a dirty window. We moved from the flat, gray plains of Ohio into the rolling green hills of Kentucky, and finally into the deep, misty mountains of Tennessee. I didn't sleep. I watched the world blur by, a long, continuous smear of gas stations, fast food signs, and endless stretches of highway. With every mile that passed, the sterile world of the group home felt smaller, more distant, like a bad dream I was slowly waking from. I kept rereading the lawyer's letter, tracing the words with my finger as if to convince myself they were real. Sarah Vance. My mother. The name felt foreign on my tongue. The file had always referred to her as the birth mother. A biological fact, not a person. But this letter, this farm, it suggested she was more than that. It suggested she had a plan. The bus finally pulled into a small, dusty depot on the outskirts of Chapel Creek. When I stepped off, the air hit me like a warm, wet blanket. It was thick with the smell of damp earth, honeysuckle, and something else. Something wild and green. The town was small, nestled in a valley between two large, tree-covered hills. The main street looked like it hadn't changed in 50 years. Brick storefronts with faded awnings, a single blinking traffic light, and an old-fashioned diner with a neon sign that flickered open. Mr. Abernathy's office was right on the main street, a modest shingle hanging above a heavy oak door. The sign read, Silas Abernathy, Attorney at Law. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, and pushed the door open. The office was quiet, filled with the hushed, dignified air of old books and older wood. A man, who must have been in his late 60s, sat behind a massive desk. He had a kind, deeply wrinkled face and a shock of white hair that seemed to have a life of its own. He looked up over a pair of reading glasses as I entered. "You must be Leo," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, feeling small and out of place. "I'm Silas Abernathy. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Your mother would be, well, she'd be very proud." He gestured to a worn leather chair in front of his desk. "Please, sit." The mention of my mother sent another jolt through me. He spoke of her like he knew her, like she was a real person. "You knew her?" I asked, my voice cracking slightly. He leaned back in his chair, a sad, knowing look in his eyes. "I did. Not well, but well enough. She came to me a long time ago, when you were just a baby. She was a very determined woman, Leo. Very determined and very scared. She set all this up with me back then. The trust, the property, the instructions to contact you on this exact day. She planned it all." He slid a thick stack of documents across the desk toward me. "This is the deed to the property. It's all in your name, free and clear. The back taxes for this year are due in a few months, but other than that, it's yours." He then pushed a small, tarnished brass key across the desk, followed by another envelope, this one old and yellowed with age. It was sealed with a wax stamp. "She left this for you too," he said softly. "Her instructions were that you were to receive it with the key. It's not from me. It's from her." I stared at the envelope. My mother's handwriting, if this was it, was a graceful, looping script. My name, Leo, was written on the front. A letter from a ghost. I couldn't bring myself to touch it yet. "Why?" I asked, the question escaping me before I could stop it. "Why all this? My file says she gave me up. It says—" Mr. Abernathy held up a hand, his expression full of a sorrow that seemed to be on my behalf. "Leo, the files tell one story. Your mother wanted you to have the truth. I think you'll find it in that letter." He stood up, signaling our meeting was over. "The farm is about 5 miles out of town. You can call the town's taxi service. Old Man Hemlock will drive you. The address is on the deed." He walked me to the door, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "It's going to be a lot to take in, son. The place has been empty a long time. It needs work, but it's good land. It's a good place to start over." I thanked him, my mind a whirlwind of confusion and disbelief. I walked out of his office and back into the humid Tennessee air, clutching a deed, a key, and a letter that held the key to everything else. The weight of it all felt immense, like I was carrying the gravity of a life I'd never lived. Old Man Hemlock's taxi was a rattling, 20-year-old sedan that smelled of stale tobacco and peppermint. He was a creature of few words, which I was grateful for. I needed the silence to try and process the impossible turn my life had just taken. We drove out of the small town and onto a winding country road. The houses grew farther apart, replaced by wide-open fields and dense patches of woods. The landscape was beautiful in a raw, untamed way. After a few miles, he turned onto a gravel driveway, almost completely hidden by overgrown bushes. The car bumped and jostled for a few hundred yards before the trees opened up, and I saw it. The farmhouse. My farmhouse. Mr. Abernathy had said it needed work. That was the understatement of the century. It was a 2-story wooden house that might have been white once, but was now a patchwork of gray, weathered planks and peeling paint. The roof on the porch sagged dangerously in the middle, and several windows were boarded up. The lawn was a jungle of weeds and wildflowers, rising up to swallow the porch steps. To the left stood a large red barn, its paint faded to a dull rust color, one of its huge doors hanging crookedly from a single hinge. It looked less like a home and more like a shipwreck, a forgotten vessel slowly being reclaimed by a sea of green. Hemlock put the car in a park and grunted. "This is it. End of the line." He didn't seem to expect a response. I paid him the fare, my hands fumbling with the small roll of cash from my state check. He took the money, gave me a long, pitying look, and drove away, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust. I stood there at the edge of the driveway for a long time, just looking. The silence was absolute, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall grass. It should have been terrifying. It should have felt like the loneliest place on earth. But it didn't. As I looked at the broken-down house and the wild, overgrown land, I felt a strange, quiet hum of connection. It was a wreck, it was a disaster, but it was mine. With the heavy brass key in one hand and my mother's letter in the other, I waded through the tall grass toward the front porch. The wooden steps groaned in protest under my weight, but they held. The front door was covered in a thick layer of dust and cobwebs. I slid the key into the lock. It was stiff, and I had to jiggle it, putting my shoulder into the door before it finally gave way with a loud, groaning creak. The air that rushed out from inside was stale and musty, the smell of trapped time. I stepped across the threshold into the gloom. Dust motes danced like tiny fairies in the single shaft of sunlight that pierced through a grimy window. The house was empty, not just unoccupied, but completely empty. There was no furniture, no pictures on the walls, nothing to suggest that anyone had ever lived here. Just bare wooden floors, water stains on the ceiling, and the ghostly outlines in the dust where furniture once sat. It was a shell. A memory of a home. I walked through the downstairs rooms. A living room, a dining room, a kitchen with ancient, rust-stained appliances. Everything was coated in a thick blanket of dust. It was clear no one had set foot in here for more than a decade. I felt a pang of disappointment. I had hoped, foolishly, that I would find some piece of her here, some remnant of the life she had lived. But there was nothing. Just emptiness. I sat down on the floor in the middle of the living room, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The hope that had carried me all the way from Ohio began to curdle into despair. Maybe this was the joke after all, an empty, decaying house in the middle of nowhere, a legacy of nothing. Then my fingers brushed against the old envelope in my pocket. Her letter. The truth, Mr. Abernathy had said. With trembling hands, I broke the wax seal and unfolded the brittle, yellowed pages. The ink was slightly faded, but her handwriting was clear and strong. It began with 2 words that shattered my world. My Leo. My Leo, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means 2 things. It means you are 18 years old, a man, and it means that I am gone. I hope, with everything in my soul, that you have had a safe and happy childhood. I know you were raised to believe I abandoned you. I know this because I am the one who created that story. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I need you to know it was a lie. It was a lie I told to save your life. I had to stop reading. The words swam before my eyes, blurring through a sudden film of tears. A lie to save my life. The phrase echoed in the empty room, filling the silence with 1,000 questions. I took a ragged breath and forced myself to continue reading. I fell in love with your father when I was very young, she wrote. He was charming, handsome, and full of promises. But underneath it all, he was a dark and violent man. By the time I realized how dangerous he was, I was already pregnant with you. You, my beautiful boy, were the best thing that ever happened to me. You were my light. But your very existence made him angry, jealous. He saw you as a rival for my attention. When you were just a few months old, he hurt you. It was an accident, he said, but I saw the look in his eyes. I knew it would happen again, and I knew that one day he would not stop. So I ran. I took you, and I ran. Her words painted a picture of a life I could barely imagine. A life of fear, of constant motion, of hiding in cheap motels and women's shelters. She described how he had hunted them, always managing to find them. His rage growing with each failed attempt to control her. He had money and connections, she wrote. I had nothing. The law couldn't protect me. They saw it as a domestic dispute. I knew he would never stop until he had me back, and I knew that as long as you were with me, you would never be safe. He would use you to hurt me. So I made the most painful choice a mother can make. I chose to save you, even if it meant losing you. This was where the plan was born. She had a small inheritance from her own grandmother, a woman I'd never known existed. It was just enough to buy this small, forgotten farm, a place so remote she hoped he would never find it. She bought it under a corporate name, a shield to hide her ownership. This was supposed to be our sanctuary, our escape. But he was closing in again, and she was out of time. I couldn't just disappear, the letter continued. He would have spent his life looking for you. I had to make him believe you were no longer my concern. So I created a false trail. I made it look like I'd given you up to the state, like I was an unfit mother who had simply walked away. I built a file with the help of a sympathetic social worker that painted me as unstable and transient. And then I let him find me alone. I told him you were gone, lost in the system, and that I didn't care where you were. He didn't believe me at first, but I was convincing. I let him believe he had broken me. The final part of the letter was the most difficult to read. The last piece of the plan was the hardest. To make sure he would never, ever look for you again, I had to disappear permanently. Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer, helped me set up the trust for you and this farm. Everything was designed to stay dormant until your 18th birthday, the day you would legally be an adult, the day your father could no longer claim any rights to you. I left this letter and a few other things for you to find. They will tell you the rest of the story. I am so sorry, Leo. I am sorry for every birthday I missed, for every scraped knee I couldn't kiss, for every night you felt alone. Please know that not a single second went by that I did not love you with my entire being. My every breath was for you, this farm, this land. It was my dream for us. Now it has to be your dream. Make a life here. Be safe, be happy, be free. That is all I ever wanted. The first key to the rest of the truth is in the heart of the home, where a fire once burned to keep a family warm. I love you forever, Mom. I let the letter fall to the floor, my whole body shaking. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. It wasn't just a story, it was a confession, a testament, a love letter from beyond the grave. My entire life, my entire identity, had been built on a foundation of abandonment. And in the space of 10 minutes, that foundation had crumbled, replaced by a truth so staggering, so full of love and sacrifice that I could barely comprehend it. She hadn't left me. She had protected me. She had orchestrated a disappearing act so complete that it had fooled the state, her pursuer, and her own son. The emptiness of the house no longer felt like neglect. It felt like a stage, deliberately cleared for my arrival, and her last words, a clue. Where a fire once burned to keep a family warm. The fireplace. I scrambled to my feet and rushed to the living room fireplace. It was old, made of river stones, its gaping mouth filled with dust and dead leaves. I knelt down, my heart pounding, and began to feel along the stones, searching for anything. A loose rock, a hidden latch, the next piece of the puzzle my mother had left for me. My fingers, coated in a thick layer of soot and grime, traced the mortar between the cold river stones. The clue felt both poetic and painfully literal. The heart of the home. I ran my hands over every surface inside the firebox, tapping gently, listening for a hollow sound. Nothing. I felt along the mantel, a thick, rough-hewn beam of wood, checking for any seams or hidden compartments. Still nothing. Frustration began to bubble up inside me, mixing with the grief and confusion. Was this another dead end? A metaphorical clue I was too simple to understand? I sat back on my heels, staring into the dark maw of the fireplace. The light from the window caught something on the back wall of the firebox, a faint scratch on the soot-covered stone. I leaned in closer, using the sleeve of my shirt to wipe away decades of black dust. Underneath, I saw it. A single stone, slightly different in color and texture from the others, with a small, almost invisible seam around its edge. My breath caught in my throat. I pressed on it with my fingertips. It didn't move. I pushed harder, my muscles straining. It was solid. Then I remembered the key. Not the house key, but the heavy brass one Mr. Abernathy had given me. It felt too ornate for a simple door. On a hunch, I looked for a keyhole. Tucked away in the corner, almost perfectly camouflaged, was a tiny, dark slit. The key fit. I turned it, and there was a low, grinding click. The stone pivoted inward, revealing a small, dark cavity hidden within the chimney. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely reach inside. My fingers brushed against a cold metal object. I pulled it out. It was a small tin lockbox, the kind people use for cash. It was heavy. On the top, taped to the lid, was another envelope, smaller than the last, with a single word written in my mother's hand. Read this first. I took the box and the letter and sat on the dusty floor, the afternoon sun slanting through the grimy window. I opened the second letter. This one was shorter, more practical. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you found this, you are smarter than I even imagined. Inside this box is everything I could save for you. It's not much, but I hope it's enough to give you a start. There is cash. Use it for the taxes, for food, for repairs. Don't tell anyone about it. There are also documents in here that will explain the danger I was running from. His name is Richard Sterling. He is your biological father. Do not, under any circumstances, try to find him. The story of my death in a car accident was also a fabrication, a final firewall to protect you. I simply disappeared. As far as the world knows, Sarah Vance ceased to exist 12 years ago. It was the only way to be sure he would stop looking. The documents in here are my only proof of what he was capable of. Keep them safe. They are your insurance policy. The last thing in this box is a map. This land is more than just a farm. It holds a secret. My grandmother, your great-grandmother, believed in being prepared. Follow the map. It will lead you to our real legacy. Be careful, and know that I am always with you. Your loving mother, Sarah. My mind was reeling. Richard Sterling, a name for the monster in my story. And she wasn't dead. She had just vanished for me. The sacrifice was so immense I could barely breathe around the thought of it. With a sense of dread and reverence, I opened the tin box. Inside, neatly bundled, was a thick stack of cash. I didn't count it, but it looked like more money than I had ever seen in my life. Beneath the money was a file folder. I opened it. It was filled with copies of police reports she had filed for domestic abuse, all of them dismissed. There were photographs of her with bruises, a restraining order that had been violated without consequence, and sworn affidavits from 2 of her friends, their words describing a man of terrifying cruelty. This was her proof, her unheard screams, collected on paper, and at the very bottom of the box, just as she'd said, was a map. It was hand-drawn on a piece of old, brittle parchment. It was a map of the 30 acres I now owned. The farmhouse and barn were clearly marked, but there was another marking, a red X deep in the wooded section of the property, near a landmark labeled the Old Quarry. Beside the X were the words, "The Root Cellar, your inheritance." My inheritance? I thought this farm was my inheritance. What else could there be? The weight of it all was crushing. The money, the terrifying documents, the map to a secret. This wasn't just a fresh start, it was a mission, a legacy of secrets I was now responsible for. I felt a surge of anger at this Richard Sterling, at a system that failed her, at the world that had forced her into such a desperate corner. But underneath the anger was a fierce, protective love for the mother I had never known. She had given me a fortress, a war chest, and a map. She had given me a chance to fight back, even if it was just by surviving, by building a life on the land she had saved for me. The sun was beginning to set, painting the dusty room in shades of orange and purple. I was hungry, exhausted, and emotionally shattered. But for the first time, I had a purpose. I had to see this through. I had to honor her sacrifice. First things first. I needed supplies. I carefully hid the box back in the chimney, locked it, and put the key in my pocket. I counted out $200 from the stash, a fortune to me, and tucked it away. I found the number for Hemlock's taxi and called him. When he arrived, his expression was one of mild surprise. "Decided you ain't cut out for the hermit life already?" he grumbled. "No, sir," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I'm going into town to buy some groceries, and some cleaning supplies, and a flashlight. I'm going to need a good flashlight." He just grunted again, but as we drove back toward the blinking traffic light of Chapel Creek, I thought I saw the faintest hint of a smile on his face. The house was a wreck, the past was a nightmare, and the future was a mystery. But I had a map, and I was ready to follow it. The next few days were a blur of hard, physical labor. I started with the house. Armed with buckets, sponges, bleach, and a newfound sense of determination, I waged war on the years of dust and grime. I scrubbed floors until the original wood grain started to show through. I washed windows, letting in sunlight that hadn't touched these rooms in over a decade. The work was grueling. My muscles ached in ways I didn't know were possible. At night, I didn't even have a bed. I slept on the floor in a corner of the living room, using my duffel bag as a pillow. But it was the most satisfying exhaustion I'd ever felt. With every square foot of floor I cleaned, with every pane of glass I cleared, I felt like I was reclaiming the space, not just from neglect, but for her. I was making her dream a reality, one painful, deliberate motion at a time. During the day, I worked. At night, I sat on the porch and studied the map. The property was a long, rectangular plot of land. The house and barn were situated near the road, surrounded by about 10 acres of overgrown pasture. Behind that, the land sloped upwards into a dense forest that covered the remaining 20 acres. The quarry was marked on the far side of the property, almost at the edge of the woods. It would be a hike to get there. I needed to be prepared. I spent some of the money on practical things: a sturdy pair of work boots, a durable jacket, a powerful flashlight, and a small hatchet to clear away the underbrush. Every purchase felt significant, an investment in my new life. I made several trips into town with Mr. Hemlock. I was becoming a regular. I started to learn the rhythms of Chapel Creek. I discovered the diner on Main Street had the best biscuits and gravy I'd ever tasted. The woman who ran it, a kind, grandmotherly figure named Betty, started calling me honey on my second visit. "You're Sarah's boy, aren't you?" she asked one morning. Her eyes full of a gentle curiosity. I was shocked. "You knew my mother?" Betty smiled, a sad, wistful expression on her face. "Not well. She kept to herself mostly. Came in here a few times before she left. She was a quiet thing, but she had kind eyes, a sadness in them, too. I'm glad to see someone back at that old place. It's a good farm. It just needs love." Her words were like a balm on a raw wound. Someone remembered her. She wasn't just a ghost. She was real. A week after my arrival, I decided I was ready. I packed a small backpack with water, some food, the flashlight, and the hatchet. And of course, the map. The sun was bright, the air was warm, and I set off across the overgrown pasture behind the house. The grass was waist-high in some places, and the going was slow. But as I walked, I felt a growing sense of connection to the land. This wasn't just dirt and weeds, this was my land. Every step I took was on soil that belonged to me, to my mother. After about 20 minutes, I reached the tree line. The forest was dense and dark, a wall of green. I took a deep breath and plunged in, using the hatchet to clear away the thickest branches and vines that blocked my path. The air grew cooler, smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I followed the contours of the land, just as the map indicated, heading steadily uphill. After nearly an hour of hiking, I heard it, a faint trickle of water. The map showed a small creek running near the quarry. I was getting close. I pushed through a final thicket of bushes and stepped into a clearing, and there it was, the quarry. It was a huge, bowl-shaped scar in the earth, its steep, rocky walls dropping down to a small, turquoise-colored pool of water at the bottom. It was both beautiful and intimidating. According to the map, the root cellar was supposed to be somewhere along the western rim. I began to circle the edge of the quarry, my eyes scanning the dense undergrowth for any sign of a structure, a door, anything out of the ordinary. I found it almost by accident. I stumbled on a loose rock, and as I fell, my hand braced against what I thought was a moss-covered boulder. But it wasn't a boulder. It was a door, a heavy wooden door, set almost flush into the hillside, so overgrown with moss and vines that it was nearly invisible. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The handle was a simple iron ring, rusted solid. I had to use the hatchet to pry the door open. It swung inward with a deep, groaning shudder, revealing a set of steep stone steps leading down into absolute darkness. I switched on my flashlight, its powerful beam cutting through the gloom, and I took the first step down into the earth. The air in the root cellar was cold and damp, a stark contrast to the warm day outside. It smelled of earth, stone, and something else, something old, like aging paper and dry wood. The flashlight beam danced across rough stone walls, a low, arched ceiling, and a packed dirt floor. It was larger than I expected, about the size of a small room, and it wasn't empty. Against the far wall, there were several large wooden crates stacked on top of each other, and on top of the crates there was a small wooden table, and on the table there was a lantern and another letter. My mother, it seemed, had a flair for the dramatic. I walked over to the table, my boots making soft sounds on the dirt floor. The envelope was thick, just like the others. It simply said, "My brave boy." I picked it up, my fingers tracing her familiar script. It felt like I was in a dream, a treasure hunt orchestrated by a ghost. Part of me was terrified of what new truth this letter would reveal, what new burden it would place on me. But a larger part of me was desperate to hear her voice again, even if it was just on paper. I sat down on one of the sturdy wooden crates, the flashlight propped up to illuminate the small space, and I opened the letter. "My Leo," it began. "You found it. I knew you would. Your great-grandmother built this cellar 100 years ago to store preserves and survive harsh winters. I have repurposed it to help you survive your future. What you see in these crates is your inheritance. It is the story of our family, and it is your protection." I paused, looking at the crates. They were solid, sealed shut. What could possibly be inside? I continued reading. "Our family, the Vances, have lived on this land for generations. We were never wealthy, but we were resourceful. My grandmother, your great-grandmother Eleanor, was a remarkable woman. She saw the world changing. She saw the Great Depression. She saw wars. And she saw how easily people could lose everything. She didn't trust banks, and she didn't trust the government. She believed in tangible things, land, gold, and secrets." My eyes widened. Gold? It sounded like something out of a movie. "Over the course of her life," the letter went on, "she slowly and secretly converted her savings into gold and silver coins. She hid them here in this cellar, a secret passed down only from mother to daughter. My mother knew about it, and she passed the secret to me. It was meant to be a last resort, an emergency fund for the family to survive a catastrophe. When your father became my catastrophe, I knew I had to use it. Not for myself, but for you. A portion of it was used to buy this farm under a hidden name and to set up the trust to pay the taxes. But the bulk of it is still here, for you." I couldn't believe what I was reading. I stood up and walked to the nearest crate. It was heavy. I found a small crowbar I had brought with me and wedged it under the lid. The wood groaned and splintered as I pried it open. I shone my flashlight inside. The crate was filled with dozens of canvas bags. I reached in and pulled one out. It was heavy, and it clinked with a sound I had only ever heard in movies. I untied the drawstring and poured the contents into my hand. Gold coins. They gleamed in the beam of my flashlight, heavy and real. I felt a wave of vertigo, leaning against the wall to steady myself. This was impossible. Listen, if you've made it this far into my story, it means you're not just here for a casual listen. It means something about this is resonating with you. The feeling of being lost, of discovering a truth that changes everything, of finding strength you never knew you had. I just want to take a second and say thank you. It means the world to me to have you here, sharing this journey. This community we're building is for people who get it, for people who know that life isn't always simple or easy. If you have a story about a second chance, a hidden strength, or a discovery that redefined your world, I genuinely want to hear it in the comments below. Your stories matter. They help all of us feel a little less alone. Now, let's get back to that root cellar, because what I found next wasn't just about the money. I spent the next hour opening the other crates. They were all the same, filled with bags of gold and silver coins. It was a fortune, a life-altering amount of money that I couldn't even begin to calculate. But the last crate was different. It didn't clink when I moved it. It was lighter. When I pried it open, I found it was filled not with gold, but with paper. It was a collection of old journals, photo albums, and legal documents. It was the history of my family. I spent hours in that cold, damp cellar, reading through the journals of my great-grandmother Eleanor. I saw photographs of my mother as a little girl, smiling and happy, playing on this very farm. I saw my grandmother, a woman I'd never even seen a picture of. I was seeing, for the first time, the lineage I came from. These weren't just ghosts anymore, they were people. Strong, resilient women who had lived and loved and fought for their family on this piece of land. My mother's final letter explained the last part of her plan. "The money is a tool, Leo," she wrote. "It can buy you security, it can help you rebuild this farm, but it is not your inheritance. Your inheritance is this land, this history, and the strength that is in your blood. But I have to warn you, the world is full of men like your father. People who will try to take what you have." Shortly before I disappeared, a development company started making inquiries about this land. They want to build a resort here, around the quarry. They offered to buy the farm, but I refused. I have a feeling they haven't given up. They will likely come to you with an offer. They will offer you a lot of money, an easy way out. It will be tempting to take it, to sell this place and all its memories and start fresh somewhere else. Her words were prophetic. When I returned to the house that evening, exhausted and overwhelmed, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Mountain View Estates Development Corporation. It was a formal, aggressive letter stating their long-standing interest in the property and making a cash offer that was, even to my inexperienced eyes, shockingly high. It was enough money to go anywhere, to be anyone, to wash my hands of this complicated past and never look back. The letter from the developers felt like a test. My mother had foreseen it. She had laid out the choice for me. On one hand, there was a pile of cash, a clean break, an escape from the ghosts and the responsibility. On the other, there was this broken-down house, 30 acres of wild land, and a legacy of sacrifice and love that I was only just beginning to understand. For 2 days, I did nothing. I sat with the 2 letters, my mother's and the developers, side by side on the dusty floor. I walked the land, from the sagging porch of the farmhouse to the silent, watchful quarry. I thought about the life I could have, the easy life. No more struggle, no more aching muscles from scrubbing floors, no more sleeping in a sleeping bag. I could buy a nice apartment in a city, get a degree, blend in. I could erase the boy from the group home, erase the orphan, and become someone new, someone unburdened. But then I thought of my mother. I thought of her hiding in the dark, writing these letters, creating a lie to save my life. I thought of my great-grandmother Eleanor, a tough, forward-thinking woman who had buried a fortune in the earth to protect her family. I thought of the generations of Vances who had worked this land. Selling it felt like a betrayal. It felt like telling them that their sacrifice, their struggle, their love, it wasn't worth the effort. It felt like selling my own soul. On the third day, I made my decision. I found the number for Mountain View Estates on the letterhead and I called them. A slick, professional voice answered on the other end. "Mr. Vance," he said, his tone oozing false friendliness. "I'm so glad you called. We have a very generous offer on the table for you. It could set you up for life." I took a deep breath, the dusty air of the farmhouse filling my lungs. I thought of my mother's words. "Make a life here, be safe, be happy, be free." "I appreciate the offer," I said, my voice clear and steady. "But the answer is no. This farm is not for sale, not now, not ever. Please don't contact me again." I hung up before he could respond. The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with a sense of rightness, of peace. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, and also the easiest. I had chosen my inheritance. I had chosen to stay. I had chosen home. The rejection of the developer's offer was a turning point. It was the moment I stopped being a guest in my own life and started being the architect of it. The first thing I did was take a small portion of the gold to a reputable dealer in a city 2 hours away. The look on the man's face when I presented the old coins was something I'll never forget. The money I received was more than enough to get started. I opened a bank account, paid the back taxes on the farm, and hired a local contractor to assess the house. The list of repairs was long and daunting. A new roof, updated wiring, new plumbing, structural support for the porch. It was going to be a long and expensive process. But for the first time, the challenge didn't feel overwhelming. It felt like a privilege. I started small. I bought a bed, a real mattress that felt like sleeping on a cloud after years of group home cots and a week on the floor. I bought a small refrigerator and stocked it with food. These simple acts of domesticity, of building a home, felt revolutionary. I spent my days working alongside the contractors, learning as I went. I learned how to patch drywall, how to lay flooring, how to frame a wall. My hands, once soft and unused, became calloused and capable. I was physically and mentally exhausted every single day, but I had never felt more alive. Slowly, painstakingly, the house began to transform. The sagging porch was repaired and strengthened. The new roof kept the rain out. Fresh paint, a soft, warm white, covered the weathered gray planks. It was beginning to look less like a ruin and more like a home. I left my mother's room, the one I imagined was hers, for last. I wanted it to be perfect. As we pulled up the old rotten floorboards, we found something tucked between the joists. It was a small, hand-carved wooden bird, its paint faded, with a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper tucked into a hole in its base. I unrolled it. It said, in my mother's handwriting, "For Leo, so you will always have wings." I held the small bird in my hand, the wood worn smooth, and I cried. Not from sadness, but from a profound sense of connection, of a love that had transcended time and separation. My life found a new rhythm, dictated by the rising sun and the long list of tasks each day held. I wasn't alone in my work for long. The community of Chapel Creek, slowly but surely, began to embrace me. Betty from the diner would send over pies. Mr. Hemlock, the taxi driver, would drop by with his toolbox, offering gruff but helpful advice on my repairs. The owner of the local hardware store gave me a discount, telling me he was glad to see that old Vance place getting some respect again. These small acts of kindness were anchors, mooring me to this place and its people. I was no longer just Sarah's boy, I was Leo, the guy who was fixing up the old farm. I was becoming part of the fabric of the town. One evening, as I was sitting on my newly repaired porch, Watching the fireflies begin to dance over the pasture, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Silas Abernathy, the lawyer. He got out and walked up the steps, a warm smile on his face. "Well, I'll be," he said, looking at the house. "You've worked miracles here, son." He handed me an envelope. My heart skipped a beat, but he quickly reassured me. "It's not bad news, it's from me." I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was of my mother standing on this very porch. She was young, maybe my age, and she was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile of pure joy. She was beautiful. "I took that picture the day she closed on the farm," Mr. Abernathy said softly. "She was so happy that day, so full of hope. She wanted this place to be a sanctuary. It looks like it finally is." We sat there for a while, not saying much, just watching the day end. In that quiet moment, I felt the last piece of the puzzle click into place. I wasn't just fixing a house. I was fulfilling her dream. I was tending to her hope. It's been a year now since I first stepped foot on this farm. The house is livable, comfortable, filled with second-hand furniture I've collected and repaired. The pastures, once choked with weeds, are cleared. I bought a few chickens, and their clucking is a constant, cheerful soundtrack to my days. The work is far from over. The barn still needs a new roof, and the fields need to be tilled if I ever want to grow anything. It's a lifetime of work, I think. But I have a lifetime to give it. I never found out what happened to my mother. I honored her wish and never went looking for her, or for the man who was my father. I have to believe that wherever she is, she found some measure of peace. Her sacrifice gave me a future, and the greatest tribute I can pay her is to live it well. Home isn't just a place you're given. It's a place you build. It's a choice you make every single day to show up, to do the work, to honor the past while building a future. This farm, this land, it didn't just give me a roof over my head, it gave me back my own history. It gave me a connection to the strong women who came before me. It gave me a purpose. The scars of my childhood, the years of feeling alone and disposable, they haven't vanished. They are a part of who I am, but they are not all I am. I am also the son of Sarah Vance, the grandson of a woman I never met, the great-grandson of Eleanor. I am the caretaker of their legacy, and I am a man who found his home in the most unexpected of places. This journey taught me that inheritance isn't about money or property. It's about the stories we carry and the love we choose to honor. It's about finding the strength to build a life on the foundations you've been given, no matter how broken they may seem. If these stories, these journeys of finding our way back to ourselves mean something to you, consider subscribing to the channel. It's a way of saying that these stories matter, that our struggles and our triumphs are worth sharing. And please, in the comments below, tell me one thing you've done to build your own sense of home, whether it's a place or a feeling. Let's keep building this community, this space of understanding, together. Thank you for listening.